Hello and welcome to the CISO webinar, Tackling Top Challenges in Network Security. My name is Julia Boyle with Argyle, and it's great to have everyone joining us today. I have a few administrative details to share with you, and then I will turn things over to our esteemed speakers. First, we would like to thank Sophos for their partnership with today's event. They've been a wonderful thought leadership partner to Argyle and are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. So thank you again to Sophos. We appreciate you joining us today. We welcome you to stay connected during today's event. For those of you who are active tweeters, please use the hashtag ArgyleCISO. You can also follow us on Twitter at ArgyleExecForum and be sure to join our LinkedIn group, Chief Information Officer, CIO Forum. I just want to take a moment to touch on our content neutrality policy, which we've curated based on the feedback we've received over the years from our members. Argyle is very proud and protective of this policy as it reflects our commitment to ensure the neutrality and overall value of the content presented at our events. We've worked closely with our speaking faculty to ensure that you receive a set of balanced and neutral viewpoints during the session today. We appreciate your members' support of this policy. We have upcoming CISO leadership forums that may be of interest to you. March 18th and 19th in San Francisco and May 5th and 6th in New York City. Finally, and most importantly, please submit any and all questions that come up during today's event into the Q&A section of the interface. Following the panel discussion, we have set aside time for our speakers to weigh in on these questions. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Rob Andrews, the Director of Product Management at Sophos. We are pleased to have Rob with us to deliver opening remarks. Welcome, Rob. Over to you.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here. I'm glad we could have this discussion. So today's theme is tackling top challenges in network security. And here's what we're going to cover over the next 20 minutes or so. I'm going to first start talking about ransomware attackers and what they've been doing to raise the stakes out there. We'll then shift into living off the land and what the new automation-based active attacks are doing. We'll spend a few minutes on cloud security, what we've seen and what's happened out there with little missteps and how they can lead to big breaches. And then we'll get on to the last topic, which is the encrypted internet and what it means for you and essentially the large blind spot it's leaving for organizations today. So let's get into ransomware attackers raising the stakes. Ransomware affects an accelerating number of victims with every passing year, but it has a big Achilles heel. Encryption is a really time-consuming process. It's driven by the processing power of the host machine CPU. It takes time for suitably strong encryption algorithms to securely encrypt the data on whole hard drives. But in the case of ransomware, the application is at least concerned with optimizing the attack and evading detection by modern security tools as it is with encrypting. To ensure victims actually pay the ransom money, ransomware will try to encrypt as many documents as possible, sometimes even risking or possibly crippling the endpoint in the process. Now, the documents that are stored or can be stored on local fixed or removable drives, as well as remote shared drives, they really don't care. They're just going to go after any and all they can. The ransomware might even prioritize certain type of drives or document sizes first to ensure success being caught by any type of endpoint protection software or noticed by the victims. In some cases, just getting a small amount of files is enough to extort a ransom from their victims. So, for example, ransomware may be programmed to encrypt several documents at the same time via multiple threads. It might prioritize smaller documents or even attack documents on map drives first. If we look at, for the example, the group Ryuk, they're targeting any organization and they're charging astronomical ransom sums. We've seen the figures as large as 630,000, which is roughly 100 times greater than what most other malware groups charge. Ryuk is just an example of what we also call, or what I would call, an automated active attack. These attackers leverage automation tools to find potential targets and get the initial foothold in the network. They're rather indiscriminate. They don't really care who you are, what your business is. They're just automating essentially spraying and praying to find would-be victims, if you will. Once inside, though, they take over and they manually perform the rest of the attack, ultimately, deploying, detonating ransomware on as many computers on the network as they possibly can. And they're going to target anyone once they get inside as well. It doesn't matter like I said, what your business does. If you have low-hanging fruit, they're going to pick it. We've seen riots spreading via several methods. Via TrickBot, which is in turn based upon Emotiv, another malware variant we'll talk about more in just a minute, as well as cracking passwords for exposed RDP servers that are facing the internet. Far too many network admins still have RDP enabled on servers which are open to the internet rather. The ability to charge a really huge ransom comes from the fact that once inside their network, they're going to spread to as many systems as possible, target domain controllers, to spread from there, disable admin accounts, and even disable and delete backups. And I apologize, I realized I wasn't clicking the build animation there on that slide. So let's talk about Emotiv. It's a really sophisticated, really nasty worm. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security considers it among one of the most critical and destructive threats to U.S. businesses. Not that it limits itself to the U.S., mind you. Emotiv, it's really not a new piece of malware, but it's one that's grew steadily and more complex and more destructive over time. We started observing and seeing Emotiv roughly 5 years ago out in the wild. It started as a Trojan, and that silently stole banking credentials. Since then, it's really evolved into a highly sophisticated platform for distributing other kinds of malware. It's crimeware as a service platform now. Emotiv serves up whatever the malware operator wants it to, or what they would like to pay for as well. So recently, what that's meant is TrickBots and QBot banking Trojans. Although it's also been linked with BitPaymer. And BitPaymer is a strain of sophisticated ransomware that extorts up to six-figure payouts. The people behind Emotiv, they're highly professional, financially motivated, and they're consistently evolving their threats and their platform to make it more powerful and more destructive. So this slide just kind of illustrates how organized criminals are working together. Like I said, we've seen Emotiv dropping other operators' malware, which in turn, those operators are delivering yet another different set of operators' malware. I mean, with this level of sophistication and concerted efforts, it's really easy to see why malware often propagates as quick as it does, as well as how challenging it makes it to deal with in the field. So for Emotiv, though, email is a primary attack vector. The initial incursion is typically with a malicious attachment that contains macros. When that attachment is opened, the macros spawn a command prompt. They unpack a complex PowerShell script, which then downloads additional payloads and tools to conduct the rest of the attack. PowerShell and native operating system tools have seen increased usage with malware operators, which really brings me to the next topic we want to discuss today, which is living off the land and using native network and operating system utilities for nefarious purposes. Let's just start with abuse of RDP, because that one's been in the spotlight recently. Both in hosted services and the client applications, we've seen attacks on this rising in 2019. Following the high-profile attacks against RDP by threat actors behind the SamSam ransomware campaigns that started in 2018, more attackers have jumped onto the RDP bandwagon and continue to pluck these low-hanging fruits to gain a foothold inside of networks targeted for compromise. And this is just an example slide where we have a bunch of RDP honeypots deployed just to see who are people actively probing these, as well as trying to attack these. Obviously, this is just a small sample of the devastation that's out there in terms of active recon and active exploit attempts. What many attackers simply try to do is they're going to first find these RDP services on the public internet, and then they're going to attempt to brute force password attack them using lists of common or poor quality passwords. Some of the attackers have chose their targets carefully. For example, they're going to perform recon against specific employees, target those employees with spear phishing attacks to obtain usable credentials that they can then leverage to break into the targeted organization. In any case, once the attackers gain access to that single system, they may employ penetration testing tools such as Mimikatz to sniff for additional credentials on that system, and with the hopes of obviously gaining elevated privileges. Of course, with those elevated privileges, then it's really easy to spread across the entire network. For example, if they get someone with domain admin privileges in hand, we've observed that attackers use those credentials to spread malware across essentially the entire portion of inside networks all at once, taking advantage of software management tools that are inherently part of Active Directory domain control servers in large networks. Attacks using this methodology, they've really been core of some of the largest and most painful ransomware incidents that the industry's seen in the last year, which is why ongoing advice to network administrators who manage enterprise networks of any size is to do everything possible to prevent exposing RDP on internal endpoints to the public-facing internet. Now, following along the thread of living off the land and automation, attackers have been leveraging stolen credentials for and exploiting vulnerabilities in remote monitoring and management solutions, also known as RMM. These RMM solutions are typically used by managed service providers, and they remotely manage either customers or IT infrastructure and or end user systems. RMM solutions typically run with high privileges, and once breached, offer a remote attacker essentially hands-on keyboard access, resulting in unwanted damage. Resulting in unwanted damage hostage situations. And then on top of it, with this access, they can easily distribute ransomware into networks from remote and potentially hitting multiple MSP customers at once. And then to automatically distribute malware to peer endpoints and servers, adversaries leverage a rather large, trusted, dual-use utility like PSExec from Microsoft sysinternals. The attacker crafts a script that leverages the collected targeted machines that they found with the RMM tools, and coupling that with PSExec, which is a privileged domain and admin account, they're going to deliver their ransomware. That script successfully copies and executes the ransomware on the peer machines, and we've seen this taking less than an hour to complete, depending on the number of machines essentially being targeted. And of course, by the time the victims spots what's going on or knows what's happening, it's really too late at that point in the game, right? A lot of times these attacks will happen in the middle of the night when the IT staff is asleep. And then to further complicate the matter is, if they have access to these RMM tools, a lot of times they'll also try to disable essentially all the endpoint protection mechanisms, making it that much easier to propagate their wares. So one important point of advice here is, if you are using any type of RMM tool or management console, it's really important to make sure you're doing things like multi-factor authentication on those central management tools and have some type of tamper protection on those. It makes it that much more challenging for active adversaries to log on to those systems and disable those protection mechanisms or gain a foothold in the first place. So following along this thread, RDPs, it's hardly the only foothold attackers in the ongoing battle we've seen in the last year. Apologies, I need just a minute to grab a glass of water. Okay, let me pick up where I left off. RDP is hardly a foothold where attackers, as we've seen in essentially the battle that organizations are facing. In the past year, there have been a wide range of internet-facing services that have come under growing threat as attackers attempt to exploit security vulnerabilities and or perform brute force attempts to break into, for example, database servers, even home routers, DSL and cable modems, network-attached storage devices, VoIP systems, and a whole range of essentially the Internet of Things type devices. One of the most common attacks that we're now seeing is networks that have been in the past have been host to botnets such as Mirai, which target some internet-connected devices. These attacks have been growing in both volume and over time sophistication as attackers constantly make small refinements in their scripted attacks, which target database servers. In particular, we've seen machines hosting like older versions of Microsoft SQL Server in the default configuration find themselves under constant attack. These rather kind of Rube Goldberg-inspired attack systems that have been put in place is really a huge interwoven set of database commands that, when executed successfully, results in the database server essentially becoming infected with itself and growing with its array of different type of malware. Now, in addition to SQL, one other thing that we've noticed is, and an alternative to PSExec, active adversaries have also been targeting or leveraging a logon and logon script via group policy objects, or GPOs. And on top of that, they're also leveraging the Windows Management Interface, WMI, and the combination of those two allow them to mass distribute ransomware inside the network. Some of the ransomware families abuse Windows PowerShell to hoist in a PowerShell script from the internet, which then automatically starts the ransomware after several days. This makes the attack appear to come out of nowhere. In this scenario, the actual file encryption itself is performed by the trusted Windows PowerShell.exe process, which makes really endpoint protection software really difficult to understand what's happening and why documents are being modified. So to achieve the same goal, we have also seen ransomware inject its malicious code into trusting running processes like SVC host under the Windows Run DLL32 application to encrypt documents from a trusted process. This tactic may thwart some ransomware solutions that do not monitor or configure to ignore the encryption activity by the Windows applications. So now I want to transition us from talking about essentially living off the land and the different type of tools that we've seen that our threat adversaries have employed to kind of get around essentially traditional defensive mechanisms, and we'll talk about a little bit about what's going in the cloud. Some of the small steps or missteps that we've seen that can really lead to large data breaches. Obviously, it probably goes without saying, but the past decade we've seen a huge emergence of cloud as a platform for storing and processing large volumes of data. Along the way, though, some of the businesses have found that pouring all their precious data into a virtualized data store has led to other inadvertent gigantic breaches of data, sometimes in the most public and damaging ways possible. The things that make the cloud a gigantic platform for computing and running business operations also create some of the biggest challenges as well, though. And if you also think about the pace of those changes that happen in cloud computing platforms, it really exacerbates the fact that knowing exactly what settings do you have at your control and how you can operate those settings effectively to secure your organization just make it a lot more difficult to really understand what you need to do to enforce good security.
Thank you, Rob. So as a reminder to all of our listeners, please submit any questions you have in the Q&A interface, and following the panel discussion, we have set aside time for our speakers to weigh in on these questions. We'll now kick off our panel discussion titled Tackling Top Challenges in Network Security. I'll be moderating the panel for the time being. So to proceed, I would like to introduce our panelists today. So I'm going to hand it off to them to give a brief introduction. So starting with Dotrice.
Yes, my name is Dotrice Davis. I'm the Chief Information Officer for St. Paul Public Schools. I've been cybersecurity for about 6 or 7 years now, and I oversee all aspects of IT.
Thank you. Now, Mike.
Hi, everyone. My name's Mike Holcomb. I'm one of the directors of Information Security for Fluor. We're one of the world's largest engineering and construction companies, and my team focuses primarily on vulnerability management, penetration testing, incident detection and response, and industrial controls.
Great, thank you. And John.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. My name is John Samia. I am the Chief System Security Officer here at TSA. Relatively new to TSA, but not to cybersecurity or working in the government, working with Treasury and the Department of Defense in the past. I am charged with being the subject matter expert to provide information and good solutions to my CISO at any given notice, depending on what the issues of the day are. And that could be on-prem, in the cloud, legacy systems, or new systems that are still in early development and testing. So it's a fun job.
Awesome, thank you so much. So now I will be handing it back to Rob, who will be moderating this panel discussion.
Yeah, my apologies. I had no idea. I set my phone down and I hit the mute button, and I did not realize I was presenting on mute. Wow. So that's a great embarrassing moment for me today. But let's kick off the panelist discussion. So I have a few topics and that I'd like to talk about. So the first is one of the most prevalent network security problems that you folks have noticed in your network industry. And I'll kick us off and then just open up for discussion. So going back to what I was presenting earlier, really poor passwords. We've seen a lot of compromises, both targeted as well as just brute force attacks that are hitting those RDP servers that are exposed in the internet. And as soon as they get one, they're gonna penetrate the network wider. They're gonna find, try to escalate their privileges, get additional accounts, and really use that as a foothold to either propagate, nasty things like ransomware, or use that network for other nefarious purposes, like we've seen with the likes of Emotiv, they have a really sophisticated, essentially crimeware as a platform service. And obviously that goes without saying is, a lot of folks, when they think about network security, a lot of times they're focused on essentially, the security of essentially the external internet. But it's obviously also important to make sure you're doing good hygiene so you can protect the internal network, right? What you want to avoid is having essentially that crunchy outer shell and a soft gooey center. As soon as they can get in, you want to make sure you've got enough mechanisms, detections, preventative type things in place that just make it that much more difficult or challenging for anyone that could essentially get past that first layer to propagate themselves further into the network. So, Idris, Mike, John, what else? What do you have to share with us on this topic?
Yeah, I would add, ask a network security person about network security. I do go back to looking at an incident detection, some type of process that organizations need, because we do understand we can still apply all the critical security controls that we need internally, and that at the end of the day, we are going to be compromised. All of our organizations are going to be compromised one day. It's just a matter of time. And so when that compromise happens, we need to have the ability to detect that compromise when it happens, so that way we can go ahead and contain it as quickly as possible, remove it from the network, find out how the attacker got on the network in the first place, and plug that gap that we have in our security program. So even small, medium-sized businesses should be doing at least a basic amount of looking at their firewall traffic, right, to see what connections are being made. Right, we're not seeing that monitoring though that's being proactively done, whether it's at the firewall level or companies choosing not to enable intrusion detection capabilities at the network layer, unfortunately, because again, we are going to be compromised one day, and we need to be in a position to identify that as quickly as possible and to at least reduce the risk that's associated with that compromise. So.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, and I agree wholeheartedly. I've worked in the network security space for about a dozen years or so, and I'm focused a lot on the preventative technologies. In my current role and my last role, I was working a lot on more focused on the detective technologies, and we always said it was a matter of when and not if someone's going to be breached. John or Idris, I'd like to hear from you. What else could you add here?
So this is John. I'm sorry, go ahead, Idris.
Yeah, this is Idris. One of the things that we're looking at in our environment is to make sure that we have good patch management and good hygiene around patch management. As you know, we have some of our vendors that send out criticals daily sometimes, so we want to make sure that we have the right products on our network that are doing patch management. We also build that into our change management process and make sure that we open change requests and go through a full change management process in order to ensure that people are aware of the changes that we're making. As you have been working in networking and IT for some time, you can imagine some of the changes do break solutions every once in a blue moon. So we need to make sure that people are, one, aware of it, they understand the change, they understand the potential impact, and then if we need to roll back, what is our rollback in order to get systems stabilized again. So just making sure you have the right systems in place around patch management. Other thing is really one of the things that we're finding in our environment, we're a smaller shop. So normally what we do is we pay the vendor to actually stand up a lot of our solutions and then hand it over to our people to support after the fact. And what we're finding out is just ensuring that we don't have misconfigurations in our solutions. One of the big challenges is really making sure that systems that when they're actually stood up, they're doing what they need to do. What we're trying to do now is as we build in SOWs or statements of work with vendors, what we're trying to do is build in a warranty period. So, yep, you stood it up for us, but you're not allowed to just walk away. But we're having a 30, 60-day warranty period where they actually come back and check the system to make sure the system is doing what they're expected to do. We're also getting smarter about pulling the right reports to make sure that the system is doing what it's expected doing and making sure that it's performing its tasks correctly. So that's one of the two things, the two things I would like to call out is really around good hygiene around patch management and making sure that your systems are configured correctly.
Thanks, Idris. Super useful. John, I believe you had something you'd like to add too?
I do. I mean, the obvious things with cyber hygiene and doing patch management are, I think, problem areas for everybody. But one of the things that has become a pet peeve of mine is poor authentication for security devices. So somebody comes and sells me a new tool to use, and they want me to put it on the network, but it uses a dumb username and password for authentication. And, oh, by the way, I get privileged access on this box, and I have almost full run of the network because it's looking at things on the network. So it's kind of eat your own dog food. If you want to sell me a good security device, your device has to be secure. Otherwise, I'm introducing more vulnerabilities than I'm really solving by introducing a device that has poor cybersecurity to begin with. The other thing is, I think it was Mike was talking about being a network guy. One of the things that I've been stressing with the people here is we need to look at IPv6. We may not be running IPv6 on our network that we know of, but a lot of devices are running it by default unless it's turned off. And I'm not saying IPv6 is not a secure protocol to use, but there are vulnerabilities, and if we don't think we're running it and we are, we may not be tightening those vulnerabilities down. Plus our tools that we normally run to look for security vulnerabilities are probably only looking based on IPv4 protocols and not IPv6. So we really need to look at both, even though we're only running IPv4, approved running IPv4 on the network. We need to look at both IPv4 and IPv6. The problem is a lot of security tools don't run well in a true IPv6 environment. So we need to push on the vendors to make sure that they're providing tools that will work on any IP network, whether it's IPv4 or IPv6.
Yeah, that makes sense, and I would actually concur with that one. I've seen that same issue going back, throughout my career. The fact that most internet service providers are now providing v4 and v6, it's default on, and it's default on all the latest modern operating systems. It makes it really easy to have it deployed, and you don't even know you have it deployed. So that's some really good advice, John. Let me go to my next question, and my next one is, when you're analyzing data on network security breaches, what do you consider to be the predominant causes of that? And I'd like to turn this one over to Dotrice. I think he has some input here that would be really useful for everyone to hear.
Sure. The number one attack vector that we're still seeing in our environment is email phishing and spam. We also are seeing impersonation. So we're a large public school district, and we have a superintendent, and we've seen on a number of occasions where we've had threat actors actually try to impersonate our superintendent and send emails to our CFO to get our CFO to cut a check and send it to X bank account. So really around email phishing, impersonations, and spam too as well. We put a tool on our network probably about a year ago, and one of the things that it does a pretty good job of helping us filter out and identify those emails that may be malicious out of the gate. It also helps us filter through spam. What it actually does is create an email digest to all of our employees, and daily is sent out, and basically anything that went into the spam box, it actually just sends an email to our staff and says, hey, this is what's in your spam box. Please look it over and see if there's anything that you want to potentially release. We've gotten really great feedback on that because before, the behavior is you get spam, somebody has to notify you, they sent you an email, then you have to go check your spam box and figure out if it's in there. Now you don't have to worry about it. You actually get a daily digest through email that simply says, hey, this is what was put in your spam box, and if there's anything that's in there. The other thing that's really cool about that is our staff now has the controls to release and accept that particular email going forward. So they have that ability. They don't need to open up a service desk ticket to get that done. That's all built into the tool. The other piece that we like about the tool is that we have the ability to do what's known as geo-blocking, and we can now go and block countries. We started with the top 10. Basically, we pulled a report from that particular tool, and we looked at the top 10 countries where we were getting compromised email accounts from, and we went ahead and blocked it. But I did talk to my data security manager probably about a couple of days ago, and we think we're going to block everything outside of the continental USA. What that has done is it allowed our teams not to have to go in and deal with compromised accounts. So if you have somebody trying to compromise an account from China, Brazil, or one of those other countries, it's basically blocking them. So that's still, in my opinion, one of the biggest attack vectors is email. We still have people in our environment clicking on links, even regardless of how much we educate them. And what we're trying to do is actually get a little bit more, get actually HR involved now. So if we have what's known as what we call repeat offenders, we're actually going out some of those repeat offenders. It's okay if it happens once or twice, but once you start getting to the 5 or 7 times, obviously something's going on where you're just not paying attention. So we're trying to use HR as kind of the big stick to help us out to get those employees on board and really understand this is important.
Thank you so much, Dotrice. Let's transition to our next topic today. What extra precautions would you or do you suggest others take in ensuring data privacy as employees work on mobile or out-of-network devices? And also, kind of thinking about that, what medium are the network breaches most common in your industry? And I'd like to steer this question to John because he's got a really unique perspective on this topic.
Sure. So we like everybody, we have to take everything and break it down to its component parts. We have different parts of our network that we consider secure and other parts that we consider less secure. There's the traditional boundaries that you normally set up with DMZs and trusted and untrusted. But because we deal with a headquarters community that's, a lot of office automation type of tools and, the traditional Microsoft Office and those kind of things. But we're also at airports, and we're looking at, different types of industry-based devices that are screening people, screening luggage, check baggage, all those kinds of things. And they don't always have really good operating systems that are cyber clean or have good cyber hygiene. So there are a lot of things you got to look at for the traditional things, but they may not apply across the board to everything else. And then you have to look at how you control traffic, how you segment traffic, and how you limit traffic with things not just with firewalls, but potentially with guards or diodes, like are you typically done between different classification of networks between like a high side and a low side. Along with that, we need to look at the tools that are used and make sure we're using the tools to their full capability, and to get concurrence and agreement between system owners and ISOs and ISMs and chief information, the CISOs and the AOs, to the authorizing officials, to all agree on the plan of attack and come to a consensus on assuming the risk and making sure we're operating in a not risk-free environment, but a management of risk environment. It's simple things like a user and a system administrator and a chief executive are all going to think that data loss prevention are a good thing, but they're all going to have a different interpretation of what that really means and what it takes to really do that. So you need to make sure whatever tools, and it's very seldom do you find a one-size-fits-all, but you need to make sure that the tool you're using is doing exactly what you think it is, and that you're not by accident creating gaps in your security posture by having tools that do a lot of things, but you're not really using all the different modules or capabilities of a given tool. We have a lot of the same types of issues that everybody else does. Email is obviously a big issue with phishing and hidden links and embedded links. There are techniques and solutions to try to clean that up and prevent people from clicking on bad things, but you can't discount user training. And we, like everybody, have a very robust and different type of user base, everything from an executive to a very technical engineer, to a code developer, to system administrators, to TSA officers out at the airport. Every single one of them is part of the solution, which means every single one of them is part of the problem. If we don't have really good, robust training and enforce that training by making sure they do it on at least an annual basis, and to make sure that they get something out of the training, they're not just clicking between screens until they get the certification page, it goes a long way in helping try to solve your problems. I grew up in the DoD. We used to talk about defense in depth being people, process, and technology. People tend to want to use just technology today. You can't. You really got to have people. People are they have that gray matter between the ears, and that's really the most powerful computer that has ever been put on Earth. We need to take advantage of that. The people are the ones that are really going to keep you secure. They're also the ones that are going to steal your data. So it's a double-edged sword. You can't rely on just technology. You can't rely on just processes. You can't rely on just training. You got to put them all together. So those are the kinds of things that we're looking at here at TSA and trying to get a grasp of things, especially as technology changes and we move away from an on-prem data center to software as a service in a cloud, which is a totally different environment from the old traditional data center. So a lot of the same problems, but the solutions are going to be very, very, very different. I can't very well put a hardware firewall in a cloud solution that's software as a service. So we have to look at different ways to do some of the same things that we do today, but not relax on what kind of protections and cybersecurity we get out of it. It's all about return on investment as well. Don't want to spend a lot of money if I don't get a lot of good return on it. If I get a lot of good return on a small dollar investment, but that can be scaled and put across a bunch of different locations, I get a lot more bang for the buck that way. So you never want to ignore, the business case of what am I doing in cybersecurity that really makes it a difference in the way the entire security, the enterprise cybersecurity posture looks. So with that, I'll turn it back over.
Thank you so much, John. Really appreciate that insight. So let's get to my next question, and I'd like Mike to address this one because I think he's got some really good insight here. And when thinking about bandwidth as the demands increase, what are your suggestions for keeping tight network security?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we all have to realize that the demands for bandwidth are only going to continue to increase. I remember when we started putting in networks into offices and we first started getting our employees on the internet. And ever since then, over the last several decades, that every year we see that demand not only increasing, but doubling and tripling. And we're always seeing more need for more bandwidth, which means we have a lot of data coming into the network. We have a lot of data leaving the network. And so we have to make sure that we're trying to keep a control around that as much as reasonably possible, and as much, we start talking about when we have where we can invest our dollars wisely. And so I always go back to starting at the very beginning when we talk about, sure, we have our network firewalls deployed to make sure that we keep all the bad attack traffic, from the internet coming into the network directly, but also using things like URL filtering, right? So that way we're limiting the internal traffic that's going out to the internet. So whether it's for business considerations around productivity, or there are bandwidth considerations, maybe some organizations can't afford a huge amount of bandwidth to support all of their employees watching YouTube all day long at the office. So we have to start with some type of URL filtering, some web filtering that can kind of limit the amount of bandwidth we have, at least limit out the known malicious sites that our employees are going to. And then we can start adding additional layers. So we talked a little bit earlier about looking for your firewall connections, right? And you can also use that not only for seeing connections and where people are going to out on the internet, but then also looking at how much bandwidth they're using. And one thing I don't think we really touched on earlier, or kind of got distracted, was that with the latest evolution of ransomware now, once your company's computers are infected, the ransomware authors are now exfiltrating. They're taking data off of those systems and bringing it out to systems that they control out on the internet. And now if you refuse to pay the ransom, they're going to give you another threat and tell you, hey, well, if you don't pay our ransom in the next 24 to 48 hours, we're going to publish at least 10% of the data that we've stolen from your network. And so that's one of the largest concerns I have, at least today, from a network security perspective, is having some type of infection where the attacker is actually able to take information off of the network, right? Whether it's proprietary information for our own company, for that of our clients. What if we have personal information for our employees, right, and contractors? It's not information that we want somebody to be able to come in, take off the network, and then just openly publish on the internet. And then, so looking at that type of information, of course, and those are things that small, medium-sized businesses should be doing. Larger environments, typically will also pull all that data into some type of SIM or security event management platform. So that way it helps doing the sorting for us, and it helps kind of look for the proverbial needle in the haystack, right? Where SIM kind of acts as the magnet that you draw through, kind of pull it through the haystack to quickly bring that needle to the surface, right? Help us find those offenses that we need to be responding to and looking into. And then the other thing I'll just mention is, we look at talking about the increases in bandwidth over the years. We've also seen very steadily over the last 4 or 5 years, right, that the majority of the traffic that we see leaving our networks is actually encrypted. And so I know at Floor, we see it steadily increase about 10% every year for the last 4, 5, 6 years, to where now about 80% of our web traffic is all encrypted. So when you think, if I have a traditional intrusion detection platform, right, I'm not able to look inside that encrypted traffic to see, is there anything malicious happening or not? And at the same time, a lot of organizations, they might rely on just their antivirus solution to determine whether they've been compromised or not. And yet antivirus solutions are not perfect, right? None are, right? And they can miss certain compromises, and those compromises we might only find, right, from watching that outbound traffic. But if 80% of it now is encrypted, right, unless we're intercepting that traffic and breaking the encryption to do the inspection, right, we're not able to find those different compromises. So it goes back to the resources we have and deploying them, right, where they're most cost effective. So again, I always start with URL filtering, right? Then start monitoring our firewalls if we can, right? We're looking at bandwidth utilization and who's uploading and who's downloading the most amount of data, making sure that it's legitimate, bringing all that event data into a SIM if that's something that we're able to do. And then also, that final level really is being able to intercept encrypted traffic, break the encryption, so that way we can inspect it from an intrusion detection perspective, and then put it back out on the wire. So we're still allowing all of our employees to get their jobs done, right? They don't see that we're intercepting and decrypting the data and reviewing it from an intrusion detection standpoint, right? Everybody's getting their job done, but we're also checking everything from a security perspective as that data comes into the network, and probably more importantly, as it leaves the network.
I'm really glad that you brought this point up, because it's a topic that I wanted to cover before I had my embarrassing mistake with with my presentation, which was on the encryption and the lack of visibility. And your experience is not at all dissimilar to almost every other organization right now. In fact, if you look at Google's transparency reports, you can see that roughly 80% of all the web-based traffic is now being served over SSL, and you're right, that number is steadily increasing. Obviously, it'll get to essentially that ubiquitous everything is encrypted in the foreseeable future. Of course, packed up with all the good stuff encryption brings, there's also the issues with all the traditional tools that we've invested in to secure and prevent our organizations and enterprises from being compromised from threats. So naturally, we see malwares being downloaded over SSL and TLS. We see malware using HTTPS URLs to do its command and control. And we even see potentially unwanted software using SSL these days. Data from Sophos Labs, we see right now roughly of the malware samples that we've collected, at least roughly a third of them are using malware. When we're talking about web delivery mechanisms are coming over TLS today, and of course that number is increasing every year. So this is a good time to wrap it up with our final question, which is, and this is really for everyone on the call today. What tips can you share for both employees as well as security professionals on methods for combating threats preemptively? I'll kick us off, and then I guess I'll turn it over to John next. So I'll cue you up, John. So one of the things that I've seen, and I've worked a few different organizations, is the deployment of multi-factor authentication. While it's not a foolproof method for ensuring that the user is who they say they are, it goes a long way when you're thinking about all the different systems that a user or an employee would need to authenticate to, and if their credentials are compromised, whether it's that compromised because they clicked on the phishing link and put their credentials in somebody else's lookalike page, copycat page, if you will, or if it's just someone trying to do simple things like brute force password attacks. It's one of the most effective tools that I've seen personally in dealing with essentially a lot of the authentication based attacks. So with that said, I'll turn it over to John, and then we can go to Dotrice and Mike to close us off.
Okay, thank you. I would second. Authentication is a big issue, and you're right. Users they have to do it right. In federal government, we use a smart card, a PIV card, to do the bulk of our authentication. But if I share my PIV and my PIN with somebody else, then they are me, and what was the point of doing all this? It goes back to the comment I made before, what tips can I share for both employees and security professionals, and that is understand that everyone is part of the solution, everyone. That also means everyone is part of the problem. So you have to combat it that way. You can't just use automation, but if you're going to use automation, use it in smart ways, but understanding your environment. You can't just push patches across the network if you don't understand what that patch might do to specialized systems. In my environment, we have a lot of specialized systems. They're not just all laptops running, word processing and spreadsheets. So we need to understand what the consequences of that will be. Make sure you have good development, test and development, and production separations. That's not just a good practice, but it'll actually save you because you won't do a self-imposed denial of service. One of the things that I fear is ransomware attacks, just like everybody else, but I also fear of that we're going to do self-imposed denial of service. And if we do that, we shut things down, we make it very inconvenient for people, but in my business, we could also put lives at risk, and we certainly can't take that risk. So yeah, automation is good, but understand your environment and make sure that you include the people part of this, not just in training, but in practice. It's all about practicing what you preach. If your training is just, go to this website and click until you get the certification page, are you really teaching your users anything? And then on the other side of that, if you really want to combat phishing attacks in email, it starts with the person. Yeah, there are good things you can do on the network and through email security devices to weed out bad emails, but in the end, it really comes down to the user. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dotrice.
Thanks, John. Really good information. One of the things that we're looking at is education. As you know, social engineering is pretty big still, and we have a tool currently that we use that really helps us kick off our phishing campaigns. And if you're familiar with phishing campaigns, we can actually create our own phishing campaigns and actually send it out to our staff and understand their behaviors when it comes to either being knowledgeable about looking at risky emails and whether or not they're actually going to click on our links. Part of that, what we're finding is these tools actually have some of these tools actually have a very extensive training library. And my data security manager and I, what we're planning to do is we're planning to partner with one of these vendors, and out of that, their training library is pretty cool because it actually breaks it down for cybersecurity training by department. So they have specialized cybersecurity training for general counsel, specialized cybersecurity training for HR, and so on and so on. So we think we'll actually be able to go out and start off with general cybersecurity training for all staff, and then be able to go department by department and give them specialized training in their particular areas. We think that's going to help change the game for us, make our staff more educated, and hopefully from a social engineering standpoint, we'll now have most of our staff on board with a lot of stuff that we need to do around cybersecurity. Because at the end of the day, we can put the best tools in place as much as possible, but if our teams are not following protocols, they're still doing things to circumvent it, those tools, in my opinion, are very useless. And we're going to spend time just really educating and instructing our staff around cybersecurity. Other thing that we want to do is we're finding out is people have amnesia or they have short memories, right? So we're going to try to do this once a year so we can make sure it stays on the forefront of their minds. Thank you.
Thanks, Dotrice. Mike, did you have anything you'd like to add?
Sure. Yeah, I think everybody had some great points, and kind of building off of what Dotrice said from the end user perspective, and we do a lot of security awareness training. One of the things that I think we do a really good job on, and we've seen a significant benefit from, is not actually focusing on just security at the office, and we do that, and we do, of course, run our own phishing campaigns and encourage our employees to think at least for a split second before they click on that link or open up the attachment, but also teach them how to stay what we call cyber safe at home. And that way, I think for most of us, right, our home is probably more important to us, right, and our families than the office, even though the office is important as well. But we take to heart, what happens in our home probably much more, right, deeply, right, than we do at the office. And so by teaching people how to stay cyber safe at home, right, they bring those skills and practices back to the office with them. So we've seen some really good inroads, I think, especially over the last couple of years in doing that. From a technical perspective, from a cybersecurity perspective, I always preach about vulnerability management, especially when we talk about being, proactive, and the idea that we can deploy. We could list hundreds, if not thousands, of different security controls that we can apply to secure our environments. But the only one that I know of that where we can be proactive and have the control is with vulnerability management. And if I get into that process, if we get in the process of running vulnerability scans, right, finding those vulnerabilities, and at least focusing on those that present the highest risk to the organization, the ones with the critical levels of risk, the high levels of risk. And if we're taking it upon ourselves to fix those in a what we call timely manner, right, and then verifying that we fix those issues no longer exist when an attacker comes knocking on the door, right, or they slip through the door and they're able to get on the inside of the network. So we've already been running those vulnerability scans that have identified the systems that are accidentally missing security patches, right, or a web server that's misconfigured insecurely, unsecured protocols, and other things that attackers and auditors alike like to look for, right? We want to be able to find those and fix them proactively before the attacker's on the network or before somebody comes in some type of audit fashion and finds them, and then those items end up in a report. So I think vulnerability management to me is the most important security control any organization can have, and it doesn't cost that much.
Great. Thank you so much, all of you. Julie, I think we're at a good place now to stop and transition to the next section for Q&A. Can I hand it over to you?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Rob, and our awesome panelists for doing a wonderful job on the discussion. We're now going to review some of the questions that were submitted by the audience and transition into our Q&A portion. So the first question for our panel, in your opinion, how effective is geo-blocking? Do you think more attacks are coming from proxy servers within the U.S.?
I'll take a first stab at this one. Oh, sorry. Yeah, we can both do. I'll start. I have, because this is a particular area of interest of mine that I've observed over essentially the last decade, and I think the answer is it depends, and it largely depends on how and where you operate and do business. For example, I know Dotrice had mentioned earlier that it was really effective for his school system, which is based here in the U.S. Obviously, he has a regionally confined organization, and so from him, the likelihood of him needing to do legitimate business with the countries that he's picked to geo-block are probably slim to none. However, if you take organizations that have to do business internationally, the ability to geo-block essentially kind of goes out the window, right? You're going to get emails, you're going to get web transactions from, all around the world. For example, if you take a large organization like Ford or 3M, or I'm picking random names, right? They've got offices all around planets. They do business all around the planet. So geo-blocking usually doesn't become an effective tool when you're at that scale. And I apologize, I didn't catch who I stomped, so feel free to interject now.
Yeah, no, Rob, yeah, I agree with what you said. And that was partly what I was going to mention. It just depends on your organization. I used to work in smaller environments, and all of our customers were in the United States. And so if I was looking at firewall traffic and I saw FTP traffic up to India, that might indicate a compromise. You know, at Floor, we're a global company, and we do business in every country but North Korea, Iran, and Syria. And so geo-IP doesn't apply to us. But if you are doing geo-IP blocking and working with other organizations, you have to remember it's not a cure-all, because I know especially some smaller shops are probably tempted to say, hey, I'm blocking all this traffic from outside of the U.S., so I'm safe, right? And so someone did mention, right, the attackers could be coming from proxies and making it look like they're coming from the United States, and they'll bypass the geo-IP blocking, and they'll readily see it pretty quickly. One thing, if you are going to go down the geo-IP route, I would also suggest is you can also block the IP addresses associated with the Tor network. And so we do see a lot of attack traffic, especially over the last year or two. Attackers will start off on certain IP addresses on the open internet, and then as we start to detect and block them, they will shift to Tor addresses, which is the network people used to get on the dark net, but attackers will also use it to anonymize their traffic and where they're coming from. So if you are going to do geo-IP blocking, I would say definitely block Tor traffic, because the chances of a legitimate business connection coming from a Tor network is probably less than 1% of 1%. And so that's something we can safely do without really inhibiting the business in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I would concur with that. The last part of this question, are more attacks coming from the U.S.? Unfortunately, I don't have a data point to substantiate my claim, but I know anecdotally from some prior research that I looked at was the U.S. itself is actually a rather large attack platform. And if you think about it, it's due to the fact, like, if you have a compromised asset, if you're a malware operator and you have a compromised asset, a lot of times you're going to springboard your attacks from that compromised asset. So that compromised asset could be that your IoT device sitting at, you know, somebody's residence here in the U.S., or it could be that RDP server that we talked about earlier, all of which, in that case, that traffic looks like it's going to be originating from the U.S. So it's a, to Mike's point, it can help reduce the essentially footprint of potential attack avenues, but it all depends on if it applies to you based on your organization and where you do business.
So this is John Samia.
Other questions? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to wrap that up real quick and say, you know, your mileage will vary. Know your environment. It's a tool. It can be very effective, but there's no one size fits all and fixes everything. So use it with a grain of salt.
Great, thank you guys. So moving on to our next question. How effective have the people testing tools been? For example, sending a white hat hack to an employee.
So this is John Samia. In our environment, that is very effective. Of course, like everything, everything depends on your environment and the business case in which you're trying to deploy the white hat hacker to go look at and work with either organizations or employees in general. But we find that it has been very, very helpful, and definitely has been effective in not only teaching people the better way to do cyber hygiene, and to operate in a worldwide connected environment, but also helping to identify weaknesses that we didn't realize that we had. So from our perspective, it's very, very effective. So what tools have we used? Some of the basic tools that pretty much everybody does, from scanning. I don't want to mention any particular vendors, but typical scanning tools, the major ones that everybody would use, I would start with those.
Yeah, I would just add, I mean, those are great points. And I think, whether we talk about using our own phishing assessments, especially like Dotrice was focusing on, that's still 80% of the time how attackers are still getting into the organization versus, bringing in pen testers to simulate those attacks. You have to remember, though, that, every attacker, just like every penetration tester or white hat hacker, is different. And so while they all probably use about 95% of the same tools and tactics and techniques, everybody, again, they're different. And so even if you have one pen tester come in once a year and try to break into your organization and they identify some security gaps, which you fix, which is good, right? And that's what we're paying for during that penetration test, that they're not going to find all of the issues that are there, right? They're only going to find the ones that they were able to find based off of their knowledge and skills in the time allowed. So it's another one of those where don't think, right, it's that silver bullet and they're going to catch all of the security gaps that you have. It's just not possible, right? And that's where, of course, our other security controls come in place.
Awesome, guys. Thank you. So I think we have time for just one more question. So to wrap everything up, what are your predictions on the future? On the future of cyber threats?
Yeah. So this is.
I can start that one off. There we go. Go ahead, Dotrice.
Yeah. One of the things that we're looking at is today we do a pretty good job of gathering a ton of log data, but we are a small team, so we don't have enough people to actually look through that log data. So what we're currently investigating, a lot of gentlemen on the phone here on this panel will probably understand, is the MDR, Managed Detection Response, right? So really outsourcing that ability to actually take our log data, send it to a third party that can actually go through that log data and actually do the threat hunting for us. So that's one of the things that we want to get better at. We have some great tools on our network. We have a small team. We think we have adequate coverage. We're following the framework. So we think we have some of the bases covered, but the one thing that we don't have covered is threat hunting. And so what we're looking at is how do we get a managed services involved and be able to, complement our small team to be able to go provide additional cybersecurity functionality that we don't have today. So MDR is what we're looking for, Managed Detection Response, and having a third party actually take our ingest our log data, and then be able to go in and use their magic sauce or whatever they use to be able to come back and say, yes, here's 4 or 5 areas you definitely want to take a look at. Here's where we're seeing activities. Here's where we made the correlation. We think this is bad because of blah, 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 and we can work with you to do further investigation and figure out what's going on.
Yeah, no, those are great points. And I was also thinking kind of the future. I'm more curious, currently sitting in this point in time, moving forward and really seeing where ransomware goes and how it's affected so many organizations to date, and how the ransomware authors are continually changing, right, their tactics. Like we mentioned, with now they're exfiltrating data and they're going to publish it on the internet, right, if you don't pay a ransom. So yeah, I'm really interested / concerned to see where ransomware goes, and then also especially kind of bleeding over from the industrial control side, and then sometimes we also talk about IoT, right, Internet of Things, but really industrial control, and where we see the nation states, right, the United States, Russia, China, right, all these government level actors where we do have active cyber war going on. We've had active cyber war going on for years, and now we as organizations, we're getting caught in the middle, right, where we see viruses like WannaCry and NotPetya, where they caused billions of dollars of damage to organizations around the world. And really that was just fallout between nation states attacking each other. And so it's another one of those where it's hard because in a lot of respects, we're just the innocent bystander, right? That's really caught in the gunfire in a lot of respects. And so it's how do we best protect ourselves, against those types of situations. And really, it's a lot of the same security controls we apply to protect us from all the other evil that's out there.
I would second the concern with the Internet of Things being connected to the network. I mean, we've got a lot of things connected to the network today that we didn't have 3 years ago, let alone 10 years ago. What's it going to be like 10 years from now? And if the vendors aren't smart with the way they set up these devices and the way they connect to the network, cyber hygiene becomes an issue of you can't do it because the device isn't capable of it. So we need to look at other ways, other security controls, network controls, whatever we can come up with to try to combat that. But just also be aware, the smarter we get in preventing things, the smarter they get in getting around those protections. So it's a race. It's always going to be a race. So look at the best, most economical ways to do it, but understand your environment so that you're not trying to overprotect yourself and clearly not underprotecting yourself.
Yeah, and if I had I'll caveat this, if I had a crystal ball, I would, like all of us, we would probably be playing the stock market more. But one thing that is rather clear to me is encryption overall, whether it be device level with mobile devices or transport level with SSL on the web, it's just becoming more and more ubiquitous. And so what that really means in terms of threat activity is it's still going to use those same mechanisms that we're used to, whether it's a web drive-by download, an email attachment that comes in, et cetera. These are all running over encrypted channels now, or if they're not now, they will be once we hit the ubiquity, which is right around the corner. That should be the wake-up call to all administrators, especially the ones that are focused on the network side, to say, like, okay, we've invested in a lot of different tools and technologies over time. Are we still keeping up with those same tools and technologies to deal with essentially how the world's changed around us? I know the answer is definitely yes for some of the panelists on this call by the comments that we heard today. But holistically, from the entire industry, I would say we're still behind the 8 ball on that topic. That's all I had, Julia. Back to you.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, I want to thank everyone for joining us today for this fantastic webinar. I want to give a big thanks to our awesome panel for their insights, and I hope that everyone enjoys the rest of their day. Thank you.